Thank you everyone for attending today's Second Tuesday seminar on our fifth C of color control called color conformance. Today's presentation is going to talk all about color conformance, and like usual, if you have any questions, please put them on the chat, and Larry is going to be monitoring the chat and will alert me to any questions that people have. So feel free to ask as you have questions and we'll make it real time. So today we're talking about the fifth C of color conformance. The last, 4 months, we talked about the other 4 C's related to color control. Today is all about conformance. And essentially what conformance is, I think it's the most important C because it determines what print is sellable. Print is either sellable or it's not. And conformance tells us whether or not it's sellable. And it's the entire reason to use color control, which is to eliminate waste so that you can ensure that everything you're manufacturing is going to be sellable, that you don't have jobs that come back on you because the color's not right. And the first thing you should be asking is, well, sellable is in the eye of the beholder. How do you know what's good enough? What color match is good enough for a customer to say, yes, this is acceptable? We're going to talk about this. And it's because it's critical to base your company's expectations in terms of the manufacturing of the color that you guys are manufacturing to ensure that it meets your customers' expectations. So our agenda for today is, how do we quantify color match? How do we go about doing that? And how can we use this metric to understand what our customers' expectations are? Then how do we apply this metric to print manufacturing? And how does it apply to the other 4 C's of color control that we've already covered over the last 4 months? And hopefully you'll see that this becomes your basis for your print quality system. And Larry, we have a couple in the waiting room. So color expectations. How close is close enough? How do we quantify what constitutes a color match? So if I have a sample like this and a sample like this, when can we say they're a match versus not a match? It's typically very subjective, and we need to be able to treat brand colors differently than images and pages. So how do we go about doing that? Well, in the past, we learn what our customers' expectations are through something I call tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge means that you've interacted with a customer and you learn what they accept and what they don't accept through trial and error, which is the wrong way to go. Now, we didn't have anything better up until very recently, so it's the way most people do it. So oftentimes printers can get in a bind when they're working with a customer they've never worked with before, and the customer's expectations are unrealistic to what the print process is capable of performing. That's when the printer gets in a scenario where they're going to potentially lose a lot of money trying to meet this customer's expectations that aren't appropriate for the manufacturing that the printer is performing. So the more we can know what these expectations are up front, the better it is. And luckily, we've got scientific research, published scientific research that helps us understand what industry expectations are. And it's based on this metric called, we phrase the term E factor, but essentially it's a type of delta E, which tells us visually how close or how far apart 2 images or 2 pages are from one another. And this becomes really important, and I like to call it delta what, in terms of how do you define the color difference. If you think about, we're always trying to hit the bullseye. How close to the bullseye do we want to be? And ideally, we quantify that with numbers. And this is, again, where we come up with delta what? Well, delta E, hopefully most of you understand if you've attended our seminars in the past, that delta E is a metric that defines how close any two colors are to one another. So how close is the cyan above to the cyan below? How close is the magenta above to the magenta below? And it can be applied to both process inks, single inks, as well as spot inks. So it's a single color comparison to one another. And typically, the metric we use for this is something called delta E. Whereas, if you look at the images below, hopefully you've heard of G7. G7 is a calibration methodology that ensures gray balance and tonality, but it doesn't ensure a color match. We call it a shared color appearance. But as you can see, those three images on the bottom do not match one another. There's differences between them. How do we quantify that level of difference? And this is where E factor comes in. So in this way, we use delta E to quantify the difference between individual colors from one another. And we use E factor to differentiate different page results from one another. So how different is this page from this page? And this is E factor, and it's essentially saying 95% of the colors on this page are within that E factor of 95% of the colors on this page. So it's directly relevant to delta E. So the higher the number, the bigger the difference. The lower the number, the smaller the difference. So you can see I can quantify the difference between the images on the left is a 3 E factor. The difference between the images on the right is a 7 E factor. And I think everyone can agree that the relative difference between the two on the right is more than twice as much as the relative difference on the two on the left. And even though we've coined the term E factor, most software programs do calculate the 95th percentile of the delta E between samples. And the way we go about doing this is we take two prints. So we take, let's say, the Idea Alliance control wedge. It could be any color bar. And we calculate what those absolute values would be if imaged to Grackle. So if we're trying to compare a print process to a Grackle print process, which is the North American standard for printing, and I take this color bar, I'll put it on my large format device and measure it. Then the software can automatically calculate the delta E difference between each patch, meaning how Grackle would image these 84 patches and how my printer is imaging these 84 patches. And then the software stack ranks them from lowest delta E to highest delta E. And the 95th percent difference, which for an 84 patch target is the 5th worst patch, that 5th worst patch becomes the E factor. And in this case, it's an 8.5 E factor. So the 95th percent worst patch is 8.5. That becomes the relative difference between how my large format device is imaging color versus, let's say, Grackle. And by the way, this 95th percentile delta E has been built into the G7 color space qualification since day one. This isn't a new metric. We're just using this metric, simplifying the term. Instead of using the cumulative relative frequency of the 95th percentile, we coined it E factor. And then along with coining it E factor, we can quantify how different your press is printing from Grackle or any other reference or any other press. And using the same metric, we can quantify what your or your customer's expectations are in E factor. And we'll talk more about that. And when we did scientific research with print buyers, we took over 200 print buyers, and we found that between a 2 and 3 E factor is almost universally accepted in terms of being close enough. 8 or more is almost universally unacceptable by the print buyers. And the problem for our printers is that most of our printers print between a 4 and 7 E factor, which is, I call a danger zone, because you're crossing your fingers that how your printer is printing is going to be accepted by the customer. And if you've never had experience with this customer, you're crossing your fingers that they're going to not reject it. And this paper was published 2017, so 6 years ago. And if anyone wants that paper, you can definitely ask us and we will forward it to you. It's on our website as well. So in this way, we've pioneered this concept of E factor to build a mechanism to quantify what a person's expectations are. So yeah, with 200 print buyers, we have an idea of how the majority of the population fans out, and we did a NOVA statistical analysis to prove there's a direct relationship between the E factor and people's level of acceptance for a color match. But there's always exceptions. Like me, when I work out, my heartbeats per minute are crazy high. I mean, way higher than they should be for someone my age. But I went in to see a cardiologist and they said, that's normal for you. You're just outside that normal range, which, okay, I can live with that. But what you don't want is a print buyer who's outside the normal range and comes in with an E factor of 1 for some sort of print process, which no print process in the world can maintain an E factor of a 1 today. If you're manufacturing plastics or paint, things like that, you can be less than a 1. But process color inks and even spot color inks on paper, no, you can't do that. So this helps us understand when people are unrealistic in terms of their expectations for a color match. And in this way, we can now use this metric to quantify what's waste. So this was a real Clemson job that you see in the lower right-hand corner. We presented the findings at a color conference about probably 6 years ago. And these are actual examples from printers that got a digital file with instructions to match Grackle. And you can see some printers did better than others. The number 3 is actually 15 E factor different from Grackle. And I think everyone can say, yeah, no one's going to accept that. Now, how do we know what your expectations are? Well, on our website, on the ChromaChecker.com website, there's off the homepage, there's a place where you can go to get the image E factor exercise. And what you'll see are numbers on the top, 1 through 9. And you see the red line here after 8. You see the amber line here between 3 and 8, and you see the green line under 3. That tells you the level of acceptance that people have in terms of the color match. And so for an educational tool, this helps people understand what a 3 is, what a 6 is, what a 1 is. And it's an E factor difference between the images. But in the middle here, we have solid colors. So if it's an E factor of here 6, that's an E factor difference between the images. But the delta E differences between these individual colors is a 6. So it helps people understand what both delta E is and E factor, and they see the relative uniformity between the two, and it's great from an educational tool. Now, we also have a blind exercise. If you look here on the right, it says blind. If you go into that, it's not going to tell you what the differences are. It lets people say, do you accept this or not? Or you're not sure. And then after about 20 to 30 questions, it'll come back and say you're a 2 or you're a 6 or you're a 4. And in this way, we blindly help understand what a person's expectations are. And we also have a hard copy version of this. So you can purchase this online. It's $99. And it has different shapes on the top, and it says, put the circle next to the triangle. Do you accept this? Yes or no? If no, put the circle next to the square. And then it works your way up and down. It actually comes with an iPhone, iOS app to lead you which symbols to put next to which symbols. And at the end, it says, okay, you're a 4 or you're a 2. And by the way, if you come out as a 1, it says, for printing today, even a 2. For printing day, you really can't be. I know you want to be a 1, but you really can't be a 1. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why as we go through today's presentation. So once we know what a person's expectations are in terms of E factor, we can then apply it to the print process, because we can define any print process with E factor as well. So we can understand what the E factor is of the print process. And we can communicate that to the operator so they have real-time judgment on whether or not what's coming off the printing device is sellable or waste. So getting back to this Clemson example, Larry, can you mute people if they're not muted, please? Going back to this Clemson example, we can tell that the first sample on the right is a 3 E factor to Grackle. The second one is a 4 E factor to Grackle. The third one's a 15 E factor to Grackle. But what's probably more important is, what's the E factor between them? So how do you do this with G7 and anything related to G7 and Grackle and CRPCs? You can't quantify how close 2 prints are to one another. You can't quantify, if you have 2 prints that both pass G7, which one's more right, which one's closer to, let's say, the Grackle aim point that you're aiming for. You don't know unless you're calculating the E factor. E factor tells you how close each print is to the bullseye and how close each print is to one another, so that you start understanding which printer is the one out in left field and needs the most help. Maybe needs a new curve, maybe needs an ICC profile, maybe needs a device link to bring it into line. So in this way, we can quantify what the differences are between the prints, and this becomes really, it's color communication. It allows us to communicate color like we've never been able to do before, and explain so much, especially to a non-color savvy person, that the higher the E factor, the bigger the difference. And then you start showing them samples and they get it. It's totally understandable. And they also understand everybody has a different expectation of what a color match needs to be. And we don't have to start reading people's minds going, oh, Julie's saying this color match isn't good enough. Now, I know Julie, I've known her for quite a few years, and I know that she's pretty picky about her color. So if Julie's saying the color match isn't good, it's probably not that bad, but she's so picky that you don't have to do that anymore, because the number's the number. And for those that use scorecarding systems are horrible at this, because you can have 2 prints, both with an 82% score. But what does that mean? It's trying to tell you, all scorecarding system uses a combination of process control metrics, like whether or not the solid's right, whether or not the dot gain's right, with the hope that it represents the visual appearance of the print. But it's an indirect relationship to the visual appearance of the print. And anyone who has got any experience with scorecarding systems knows sometimes you'll see a score that's like, let's say 30, and you're like, wow, this looks fine. And sometimes you see a score that looks 80, and you're like, oh, this looks like crap. And so the scorecard it's a old school way using process control metrics to try to represent what the print looks like. But there's some things that scorecards can't do, like they don't assess whether or not the score is within the customer's expectations, because customer might say, oh yeah, my expectations are an 80. What's an 80% score? And an 80 is not always an 80, so it doesn't work. Also, how close is the printer hitting to the reference via score? Scorecard doesn't do that. How close is one printer to itself over time? Scorecard doesn't do that. how close are two printers from one another? Scorecard doesn't do that. So in this way, scorecards aren't very good at defining waste or sellability, or even if it's going to meet the customer's needs and demands. It's really an old school way to quantify color, whereas E-factor is much better because it's taking the essence of the color, of the perceived visual color that a person is looking at, and calculates if it's within their predefined expectations that we've quantified using our E-factor exercise. So in this way, we can set tolerances for process color using E-factor on the right and spot color using delta E on the left. And it's important to understand that the lower the tolerance, the exponentially harder it is to achieve as a manufacturer. So, you know, if you're the financial stakeholder of a printer, you might say, oh yeah, we want, as a printer, we want to be a 2. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Unless, well, it doesn't work that way because really very few printing devices are capable, especially manufacturing printing devices are capable of a 2. But you want to find a sweet spot where you can meet your customers' expectations and still get good productivity and throughput out of your printers so you can make money. It's a balancing act between having the right level of quality so people don't reject jobs, but still having the ability to get work through the printers and make money. Output device capabilities. If we look at the printing press on the left and we look at the printing press on the right, if I wanted a tight tolerance, guess what? I don't think I'd be going with the one on the left. Look at the ink. This is an actual picture I took a month or so ago of the magenta ink from the same supplier for a customer of ours. And it's like, if your ink in the can is this different, it's going to be different on press. So it's really important to understand that the print device capability is a sum of the variables. So it's the quality of the print device, how much maintenance has been done on it, the consumable quality, including paper, the 5th color and 4-color printing, and of course the operator's ability to run that device. And it doesn't matter if it's a conventional device or a digital device, operators' expertise plays into the quality that that device is capable of performing at. And when we talk about controlling the output, we did our session last month on conversions. And we talked about, depending upon the type of conversion you do, that can result on the level of E-factor. So if you just want to apply a G7 curve to, let's say, an HP Indigo, you can take that Indigo from native condition is maybe a 7 E-factor to Grackle. You add a G7 curve, you'll get it down to maybe a 5 or 6. But if that's not good enough, then you can build an ICC profile for that Indigo and get it down to maybe a 3. And if that's not good enough, you could build a device link, reducing volatile ink mixes and get it down to closer to a 2. So each of these takes extra steps, extra time, extra money. Hence, as you decrease the level of E-factor for a match, you increase the time and effort it takes to get you there, and more importantly, keep you there. So these are things to consider when we're talking about color conformance and meeting customer expectations. Sometimes companies will set tolerances that are actually not capable of being hit. Here's a sample of a spot color, and the tolerance was 2, but you see the graph and the line is repeatedly going above a 2. And this is a situation you don't want to get yourself in, where you promise a customer you're going to keep their spot within a 2, and then you don't deliver it because the output device that you're printing it on is not capable of it. You're going to lose money on that deal because you made a bad decision to try to sell expectations that you can't deliver on. how do you know what your output devices are capable of? We have been doing a benchmark procedure with printing devices, especially digital printing devices, for over 5 years now. We have over 1 million measurements published in our system. We have documented what the gamut size is of different printers. We've documented what the variation of printers are within the page through a 1,000-sheet press run. We've documented what the accuracy of these printers can be with the right rip and right color conversion workflow. And we've actually got these PDFs that you can get off our website and print on your printers. And if you have ChromaChecker, you can do your own benchmark. And you can have access to the data that we've already collected. So you can compare how, let's say, your press gamut looks compared to, let's say, a Fuji J press. And these PDFs have both images on it as well as color targets that you can measure with instructions on how to print and how to measure. So you can know what a printer's capabilities are before you buy the printer. Because I know many people who've lost their job because they've bought a printer that didn't meet their expectations because they didn't do the research ahead of time to understand what that printer's capabilities were. And no two printers are equal. And even the same printer, one serial number apart, can be different. So this is also a great exercise to hold the vendor accountable that after you've benchmarked the printer in a demonstration mode and you said, okay, yeah, I'm going to buy XYZ printer. Now you can put on the PO that when this printer comes into our shop, it's going to perform within 95% of the printer that you demonstrated for us, so that when that printer is installed, you do another audit on the device to know that that printer is not a lemon, that it was set up correctly, that it's meeting the expectations that you had when you made the decision to buy that printer. Manufacturers hate me for saying this, but it covers the printer's butt to make sure what they buy is delivering what they expected. And in this way, we know whether or not the printer is, if it has a lower E factor than my expectations, we're good to go. Now, when you have multiple output devices, how do you understand that they're all printing right in real time? This is where a print quality system like ChromaChecker comes in, where we say, hey, we have different printing tracks for different printing conditions. And every time a file is measured, whether it's with inline spectro and an indigo using color beat, or whether it's a Komori with a nearline measurement system that's feeding the data into ChromaChecker, both the operator and the administrator can see real time that it's performing the way it's supposed to be performing. And when we talk about the level of acceptance, once we have the E factor, we can determine whether or not we're using appropriate instrumentation and whether or not we're calibrating our printer often enough, and whether or not I need a large profile target or a small profile target to build my characterization data set. And what type of color conversion do I need? Do I just need to apply a G7 curve, or should I do a ICC profile conversion? Plus paper and backing material and lighting, all these variables play into the level of acceptance of a color match, because the tighter the level of color match you're expecting, the more you need to pay attention to each one of these variables. And we're going to talk about that now, such as paper. Whether the paper was manufactured in the mill in Oregon or the mill in Wisconsin, guess what? It can be a 2 to 3 delta E difference in the paper based on where it's coming from. When you're buying paper for proofing, it costs more than paper for printing, because the companies like Epson that sell proofing paper, quote unquote proofing paper, guarantee that there will not be a max of 1 delta in L, A, or B. Whereas in their photo paper, it's double the tolerance. So there's a reason why you're paying more for proofing paper. I think they do a terrible job of explaining that to people, but most people until now really don't understand tolerances and what is it 1 delta E and so forth. So this is meant to help you. ChromaChecker independently tracks the paper so that you can see the graph down below here. This is an actual scenario of a paper being measured every time, and it's what you want to see. But I should have put a sample in here where the paper bouncing up and down. And we've had more companies tell us in the last 2 years that ChromaChecker helped them go back on their paper manufacturers, telling them their paper was not meeting their defined spec, and they got refunds on the paper. They could send paper back. They saved money because they figured out in the first print or two that the paper was not right. And instead of running a 1,000-piece job for a customer, which no paper company is going to refund you on that because they'll say you should have checked the paper ahead of time, at least the printer themselves caught themselves before they ran 1,000 jobs and got in trouble with the customer and lost money with very little recourse from the paper company. So paper is that 5th color and 4-color printing, and you need to pay attention to it. Something else that people underestimate is the backing. When you're taking measurements of color, you want to make sure that you have ISO compliant backing, and these are available off our website. This is made out of like a plastic. It's washable, it's very flexible, ISO white backing on one side, black on the other. So when we're dealing with transparent paper, let me find a piece of paper that's fairly transparent, that you know that with the backing behind it, see, this paper is fairly transparent, that with the backing behind it, it affects the measurement. We show a sample here where we routinely see 2 delta E differences based on whether or not there was backing behind the paper and what that backing was. If you have inconsistent backing, you have inconsistent measurements. Very critical. Measurement devices. No 2 measurement devices measure the same way. And so here I show myself on a scale, and it's actually within a minute of one another. There's no delay between these 2 measurements, and yet there's 7 pounds difference. I'm not going to say which one's right, but they're different. And the same goes with measurement devices, in that you can buy a measurement device for $59 and it has a certain E factor, which tells you the accuracy and precision of the instrument. And you can see the Color Muse is $59. It's a 2.85 E factor, whereas an Exact at about $9,000 is a 0.05 E factor. So again, you get what you pay for when you're looking at these variables that affect measurements. And when you're trying to, this is a Best Buy example where we measured the exact same color with an I1, an Exact, and a SpectroDens. And what you see on the right are the delta E differences between the measurement devices measuring the exact same color bar. So measurement devices make a difference. Different measurement devices measure differently. You need to understand these differences. Now, if you're dealing with a 5 E factor, you can probably live with most of this. But if you're trying to get to a 2 E factor, forget about it. You've got to be intelligent in terms of how you're going about setting up your instrumentation. And with ChromaChecker, we've actually built in this capability called harmonization, which helps compensate for the difference between instruments. It doesn't zero them out 100%. Nothing in the market does, but we can improve, as you see here in this example, between an ISIS and an I1, we're improving 313% by harmonizing. Between an ISIS and an I1 Pro 2, we're improving it by 363%. And an ISIS and Exact, we're 203%. So in this way, we're reducing the inter-instrument error to make these instruments look more like the ISIS, which gives you the tolerance back for your manufacturing. By eliminating inter-instrument disagreement, we're just giving you more tolerance for your actual manufacturing to get the color where you need it to be. This is very important when you're trying to get tight tolerances. Now, when we're dealing with brand colors and we're using devices like a spherical spectro, this is a spherical spectro called the CC Sphere, which can actually measure profiles on foil material. So you can print on foil, measure the profile with this, build a profile with both spec and spin capabilities. It's a point and click measurement device. It's not automated. So you're not going to necessarily harmonize this instrument to your I1. You're not going to do that. But if you have certain objects that you need to measure, like fabrics or foil, and you need to measure some parts with a spherical and some parts with a 45-0, ChromaChecker has the ability to have different tracks within the color. So you could have one track for the color or the object to be the gloss, one to be the spec, which is a spherical spec measurement, and one value to be the 45-0 measurement. So in this way, you can track one object with 3 different types of measurement devices to ensure that it's performing correctly through the manufacturing of that object. Lighting. Light booths are a huge variable related to color. And here I'm showing the spectral power distribution curve of 2 of the most popular light booths in the world. One, we'll call it vendor J, which is the green line, and one is vendor G, which is the magenta line. And what this is showing in this part of the spectrum at 475 nanometers is that we can almost have a 5 delta E visual difference if I look at a reflex blue in this light booth, which is we'll call it a J, and another light booth which is a G. So due to the light booth, everything's right about the color, but because the light is illuminating the reflected color differently, as you see down here in the lower right-hand corner, certain blues are between 4 and 5 delta E differently from a perceived color match. And I've seen this where the customer had one light booth, the printer had one light booth, and the printer was looking at 2 samples in the light booth and it looked fantastic. I was there. Doesn't get any better. And the customer's like, you're out of your mind. This is horrible. Went to the customer site, put the same samples in the booth. Guess what? Oh my goodness, they're way different. And yet both booths passed ISO 3664 compliance. And yet they were viewing, and they were actually from the same manufacturer. And they were illuminating the color that much differently. So understanding how your light booths are measuring color is also key, which is another capability of the ChromaChecker system. Here's a light booth over time. Again, nothing stays stable. A light bulb ages. An LED light bulb ages a lot less than a fluorescent light bulb, which is a reason to change to LED. But when color is critical, these are things to keep in mind. So with that, once you have your variables under control, then you can start looking at your print processes. And the last session, we talked about color conversion, and we talked about how you can get one press set up to, let's say, match Grackle, and the same press with a different color conversion set up to maximize the full gamut of the press itself. And if you want to learn more about that, go back to our color conversion session. But how do you keep track of that? Well, with ChromaChecker, you have one track. You see the top track for my color press is set for Grackle. And then the third track down is the same press, but set for full gamut. So in this way, we can ensure that my press is printing to the full range of color that it's capable of printing when that press doesn't have to match any specific reference. Customers like bright, vivid color. The more bright, the more vivid, the better. So the more you can produce bright, vivid color, the more your customers are going to be happy. And then there is a time where you do need to match your printers. So you might choose some reference, such as Grackle, and match all your printers to Grackle to the best of their capabilities. And with ChromaChecker, you can quantify how close each of these printers are matching to Grackle, so that you know that when the file is run through the right workflow, you're getting the right color, and it's telling you immediately and telling the operator immediately what's happening. Most color control systems require a color expert within the shop to try to keep track of everything. With ChromaChecker, we've taken the approach that even if you have more than 5 devices, one person can't do it all. Everybody within the shop has to be accountable for color. So we've tried to make a really simple application called ChromaChecker Capture that we're as we speak, we're adding videos, artificial intelligence, and audio to Capture, so that when you're using it or your operator's using it for the first time, they won't have to ask the expert how to use it. They'll be able to figure it out no matter which instrument they're using it with. So all the audio and all the videos are customized based on which instrument they're actually using, so that they can start measuring the color, and then it comes up with pass or fail. If it comes up with a fail, then what to do? Again, this is where we're adding artificial intelligence, so that if you're doing a large format inkjet device and 3 of the solids and tones are at the right values, but 1 of the solids and its respective tones are light, we'll throw up a message saying, hey, looks like the magenta head is clogged on your printer. Please clean the magenta head. And depending upon whether or not you have a Canon Colorado or a Canon Arizona or a Inca, you can have the instructions on how to clean that head within Capture that the operator can access directly, so they know how to clean the head on that device, even though they've never been trained on how to do that. So it's about getting that device back up and running, using that operator, helping that operator become more experienced to keep production coming out of that printer in a sellable mode. That's what that's our whole, if you will, mindset that we have with ChromaChecker, is distribute the responsibility and distribute the education and the tools, so that operators and other users within the shop can ensure that their part of the puzzle is doing what it should be doing. For instance, we've made data loggers. We work with third-party data loggers, but we built our own because we felt too many were too expensive. This plugs into the USB port of your computer, uploads temperature and humidity for each different print process. And if the humidity exceeds the tolerance set for, let's say, Canon Arizona, an email goes to the HVAC guy in your plant saying, hey, check the Arizona room. It looks like the humidity's off. So again, making everybody in that shop accountable for the parts and they're responsible for to keep the color in a sellable condition. And hopefully, based on this presentation, you're learning this is a cumulative process, in that printer variations, instrument variations, paper variations, reference variations, backing differences, light booth variations, all contribute to what level of E factor or what level of quality you can expect to deliver as a company. And these are things most management don't understand because they haven't been into it up to their elbows like we have. And so it's an educational process to, again, help them understand what it takes to keep your shop printing sellable color, especially at tight tolerances. So, in summary, color control is complicated. There's a lot of variables. You need a print quality program that can monitor all of your variables to understand what's happening to cause your printer to go off track. You need to understand where the printing device is compared to the reference. We just had 3 new users come on in the last week. And the first thing we do is we have them print samples, print targets on the printers, and then measure them in. And then we can instantly see, in fact, I should show one of their dashboards here. We can instantly see that 2 of their devices were doing quite well and the other 3 were not so well. So immediately we're going to focus on those other 3 devices and get those color controlled into the bullseye so they better match the other 2. It's all a continuous improvement process. Nothing's going to be perfect out of the gate, but using a print quality system, you can understand which devices are most out, which ones need the most help, and what type of help you need to give it to get it into the bullseye. Align your printers, your substrates to one another. Here's a sample from a customer where they printed the same image on 30 different substrates. Now, do they have 30 different profiles? No, they don't have 30 different profiles. For the 30 different substrates, they probably have 6 different profiles. But ChromaChecker tells them which 6 substrates need to be profiled to align them so that when you're printing on them, they match one another. These are some real unique capabilities that ChromaChecker provides users. And of course, it ensures all these other variables are where they need to be. And then, of course, optimize the conversions. So next steps, I'll open up to any general questions that we have, but please register on ChromaChecker.com for our newsletter, for your notifications for these seminars that we do every month. And by the way, for next month, we don't have a topic yet. So if there's a topic you guys are interested in, email me. I'll pick a topic within the next, today's Tuesday? I'll pick it by Friday. So get me what you want the topic to be on Friday, by Friday. We'll pick a topic, we'll start advertising it, and we'll begin the next series based on what your requests are. We'll be at Print United in October in Atlanta. We're doing an annual color conference workshop. It's the end of January in Tampa. Great place to be in end of January. Hands-on. We have quotes from people who've been there and really good feedback. If you need a backer or an instrument, 10% off anyone who's attended this WebEx till Friday. So you can get a data logger or whatever you want, 10% off. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't used ChromaChecker, go to chromachecker.com/trial. There's a link to this file. Download this file. It's got a color bar on it. You'll be able to download Capture, which works with virtually almost every instrument on the market. And you'll be able to measure this color bar in using Capture, and you can document what the E factor is of how close this target is to, let's say, Grackle. And then when you have it printed out on printer A, printer B, printer C, you can start visually putting them next to each other and comparing them to one another to see how close they are, and start educating the financial stakeholders of your company that, hey, this is how close these printers are to one another right now. The industry says if you never want to reject, you should be down in the 3 range. We're maybe up in the 6 range. And again, it goes a long way to educating how to communicate color and what your shop needs to do in order to get your devices to align.
David, we have a question for you.
Yes, please. Let's open it up for questions.
The question is, they're receiving printed samples from a client, and the samples do not match over time that are being supplied. So they're using Scratchpad today with Capture, but they're looking to be able to track the color in ChromaChecker. How do they do that?
Okay, great question. So Scratchpad is a function of our ChromaChecker Capture software. In fact, I should probably load it here so you can actually see it. It's a way to easily do comparisons of colors. So compare this color to that color. What's the delta E? We have a new version of Scratchpad, or it's called ChromaChecker. That's the component within Capture that today ChromaChecker measures spot colors. Very shortly, meaning within about 2 weeks, we're going to have a version of ChromaChecker that scans strips. And again, we're using artificial intelligence. So we're going to support certain strips like the ID Alliance 3-row target or the G7 verifier or our own CC84. So you don't even have to tell it what color control strip you're measuring. You measure the control strip, the software is going to figure it out. And then it's going to tell you what the E factor is to like a Grackle coded or a Grackle uncoded condition if you're in the US, or if you're in Europe, it'll do it against an ISO coded or an ISO uncoded standard. So in this way, this new version of Capture with ChromaChecker is meant to be really simple to show you what's happening. Now, what this customer is going to want is they're going to want to upgrade their Capture license to a tracking license. And we can get them more information on that. But Capture has, if you will, 2 levels. One is kind of ad hoc check and report. And the other one is tracking the device over time and being able to compare device A to device B. So that's just a 1 level up in license, very inexpensive, and we can get you that detail. Other questions?
Great. Other question is, how do we get into the community?
Okay, so Larry, you can help me with that. So let's actually quit out of my presentation here. So the community is the user group built into ChromaChecker, and off the homepage here, if you click on community, you should be able to log in with your ChromaChecker credentials, and you'll be in the community. So let me log in here. If I just say with ChromaChecker, there we go, brings me my ChromaChecker credentials. So the big thing is you need a ChromaChecker login to get into the community. If you have a ChromaChecker login, then you'll be able to get into the community and post questions to the ChromaChecker community, and we're monitoring it. So hopefully we'll answer it. And if not, hopefully our other customers will help answer these questions. Does that help?
Yeah, if you run into trouble with getting in, feel free also to send an email to support@chromachecker.com, and we'll be able to respond and help you.
Other questions?
Can you describe the difference between checking a spot color with delta E and E factor?
Sure. Just think of it this way. A spot color is a single color comparison of, let's say, what you're printing versus what you're wanting to print. So that's delta E. And then E factor is measuring, let's say, a control strip for a print process and comparing it against something like Grackle, which is a characterized color space. So delta E is a single color comparison, and E factor is a process control comparison of the difference. So with this, I'm going to log into my Capture so you can actually see some of this.
So why is ChromaChecker more comfortable with E factor versus delta E?
Because they're different. So delta E is the difference between any 2 colors. So I'm going to take my instrument here in Capture, and I'm going to measure a red, and you'll see, well, it's more of a light brown. But now I'm going to measure another sample here, and that's pastel red. So if I wanted to see what the difference is between these measurements, I can come down here and say scratch pad and compare my pastel red with my light brown, and you can see that's a 21 delta E. Okay, and it shows me that. So in this way, spot color is the difference between two measurements. E factor is if I were to actually measure a control strip. So let's say I go in and I measure this control strip. Let's see if I can do this quickly on the fly. Hope my guide's around here. So yeah, I have a guide. And so now with my I1, I'm going to make a little workspace here and scan this control strip. Give me a second.
So when you compared the two spot colors, it's using delta E, which is
Yep.
a straight value. And when you're scanning the control strip, it's calculating the delta E for all these different patches and coming back with the 95th percentile.
That's right. And I'm
So-
using one into foil in spec. I'm not using my spherical instrument here, so I'll use my handheld. And once I've measured that in, I'll have essentially a timeline showing how that device is performed. And you'll see over on the right, I have an E factor of the last time I measured it was 3.8. And if I go into details here, it shows me I'm 3.8 to Grackle. The paper's off by 1.1 delta E. The variation is off within the sheet of 0.7, and off the baseline it's 1.6. And the individual delta E's of the cyan, so the cyan from that control strip is 2.8. The magenta was 1.9. The yellow's 2. So we're still calculating delta E when we're doing E factor. Think of E factor as the summary of how close that print or that page is to my reference.
Okay, very good. So just to summarize that, so ChromaChecker is using delta E for spot, and it uses E factor as a formula of delta E. So they're both based on delta E.
Yeah, they're both different types of delta E. And the reason we called it E factor is E is for your expectations because it can quantify your expectations, but it's also a type of delta E. It's the CRF at the 95th percentile delta E. So it has a cross meaning here. And it's really the beauty of E factor is it's the essence of how visually different one page or one image is to another image or page.
So here's another question, Dave. So they're printing on metal, and the format or the size is 5.5 by 8. Is there a way to make control strips or measurements that can be checked on that size format?
So I'm guessing 5.5 millimeters by 8.
It looks like inches, 5.5 inches by 8 inches.
Okay. So when you're dealing with measurement devices, especially on metal, you're going to want to be using a device like I'm showing here. Larry, can you see my camera with the instrument?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a spherical spectro. And when we have things like foil or metal or even highly textured fabrics, a 45-0, the way the light works from the instrument is it bounces down at a 45-degree angle and back up into the sensor. And if you can imagine, if you've got a loose weave of material or something like sparkle material or metallic, it doesn't all return at a 45-degree angle. It gets scattered. And that's where the spherical has like a sphere on the inside, and it collects the data no matter where it scatters. So it's a much better instrument for measuring unusual materials like foil and textiles. And then ideally, you always want to use the largest aperture available. This instrument has an 11 by 11 aperture. So in this way, with ChromaChecker, you can build custom color bars to accommodate any size patch. knowing that bigger is better when you're using any type of device to get a more accurate result of what's actually happening there. So I'd be using a spherical, a device like the CC sphere and the 11 aperture to measure that type of material. Does that answer the question?
Yep, very good, Dave. So we're right at time. If anybody would like to ask additional questions, please feel free to send them either directly to my email or support